great thing about law is it's democratic. Everybody can participate. But if I can't see it, I cannot participate.
There's a body of administrative law that happens behind closed doors in government offices, and we don't think it's sound policy that those administrative determinations are held close to the vest. We think that they should be known to everyone.
For law to be just, it has to be open.
Secret law is an abomination. Operating in the sunshine, I think, is better than operating in the darkness. When the Freedom of Information Act was passed, I began to reflect that it was really strange that we had this very large body of private law, which was not open to the public and which seemed to me to be very much eligible for opening to the public under the FOIA. And so years later, when we were backed into this corner by a denial of our right to sue in the public interest under the zone of interest test, the only kinds of suits that we were able to bring were Freedom of Information actions. And so one of the very first suits that we began to consider was a suit to open IRS rulings to public scrutiny. And that's how we got into the freedom of information area.
For the first year, things are rough. He basically doesn't have any money.
Fortunately, my wife offered to keep me alive, to feed me for 2 years while I got the organization started.
It was not such a big sacrifice. I mean, it would have been nice to have additional income, but I thought the idea was excellent.
Tom lends the organization $60 to pay for postage and envelopes and something like that, and that is the sum total of the organization's income for its first year. But then they get a grant.
Which was $60,000, and that was enough to keep us going for about 2 years.
And this allows him to hire some staff to open an office in downtown Washington.
One of our goals was to assist the press in understanding tax issues.
Tax Analysts is not just a news service. We tell our readers what's important, we tell our readers why it's important to them, and we tell them how it's going to affect them.
When Tom figured out that the country's major newspapers were not going to be assertive about publishing the things that he found out through FOIA, he thought, well, I'll do it myself.
We decided to begin publishing a sheaf of papers every week, which we would mail to the press free. So we hired Jim Byrne. He became the first editor of Tax Notes.
We do legal and policy analysis. Now, there were readers who were a little shocked by this, and we got letters, how dare you, criticize our transactions. But over the years, they started to appreciate it and demand more of it.
Before too long, the grant funding starts to run out. And Tom, meanwhile, has been publishing this thing, but people really like it. And so as a way to pay the bills, or to begin to pay the bills, Tom decides he's going to have to turn this into a subscription product.
And I remember calling our staff together. I said to them, we have this little publication which we're giving away free, and I think we could charge money for it.
Without that initial effort to turn Tax Notes into a subscription product, the organization probably wouldn't have survived. And it proved to be remarkably successful.
This newsletter eventually became central to our business model. The world would be very different if one of the editors at the New York Times had said, "Oh yeah, sure, we'll publish it." Then he wouldn't have needed tax notes, and I think the tax world would be very different.
He got word the amount of the paper's deduction had been about $440,000. So Ira figured that given the paper's deduction, the president's personal residence, and his second residence, Ira could not see how the president had paid much, if any, income taxes.
And tax analysts released a long report suggesting that this deduction was almost impossible to explain as legitimate. And then tax analysts distributed this information to news reporters at major newspapers like the Washington Post and the New York Times, who then made use of it to do their own coverage of it.
It certainly put us on the front pages of a lot of papers across the country. And that, coupled with what's called the rulings disclosure suit, made us well known to the public. Without those two events, I'm not sure we would have survived for 50 years.